Time now for Behind the Headlines, where we take a look at some of the stories that have caught our eye around the world. And we start in the US. The New York Times is previewing tonight's vice presidential debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. With Donald Trump contracting COVID-19 over the last week, Americans have been reminded that they do have the two oldest presidential candidates in history. The Financial Times reports that social media giant Facebook has banned the far-right conspiracy group QAnon. The social networks branded it as dangerous after a surge in misinformation. Now, have you got COVID fatigue? British newspaper The Independent's reporting on a warning from the World Health Organization that Europeans are starting to feel more apathetic about the pandemic. And finally, The New Scientist has this story about how, for the first time ever, two women will share the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna were given the award for developing the tools to edit DNA. With me to review these stories are French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani and political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. Guys, good to have you with us. Great to see you. Let's start with the vice presidential debate in the US. Mike Pence and his rival, of course, Kamala Harris, meeting in Utah for this debate. Nabila, how do you think this is going to compare to that slightly chaotic presidential debate we saw last week?
Well, given that neither of these candidates is going for the top job, I think that all they need in jobs like this are solid performances, and they don't need to be showy, and they can't afford to be they can actually afford to be reasonable for a change and indeed to compromise. So all in all, I think that it will be a pretty dull debate. And certainly one that that will have nothing to do like the highly aggressive show that Trump and Biden provided. Having said that, we all thought that Trump winning the presidency 4 years ago was utterly bizarre, even though I did predict his victory for various reasons. But this current campaign has to be the strangest ever. Not only is it taking place in the middle of a global health pandemic that nobody predicted, but we now have two remarkably old men who could easily be incapable of completing a full term. And one has COVID and is in a number of particularly vulnerable groups, that is to say, those who are obese and over 70, for example, while the other strikes me as being well past his prime too.
So I think for those reasons, doesn't that make this vice presidential debate rather more interesting than in previous years? What do you think, Nigel?
Yes, and unlike Nabila, I'm rather looking forward to it later on tonight. I mean, I think that Nabila is absolutely right. We're going to get a very different style of debate than we did when Trump met Biden. So these two will be sort of constantly thinking to themselves, right, must be statesmanlike, mustn't have any temper tantrums, mustn't be nasty. Also, they're obviously on show because what is quite likely is that both of them could be presidential candidates in 4 years' time. And of course, as Nabila said, we're talking about two people who are getting on in years. Trump is 74, Biden 77. They could be president before that. So what will be interesting is to see how they set out their stall. We're talking about the hotshot liberal lawyer versus the evangelical Christian conservative. And what I'd like to hear tonight is some kind of political philosophy that underpins what they actually believe in.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of looking forward to it as well. I think it's also going to be interesting to see exactly how it's carried out, because there's been a lot of questions asked about whether these debates should go ahead. I think Mike Pence is one of the very few people who seems to have avoided coronavirus so far, which is sweeping through the Trump administration. And Nabila, it's going to be a very different setup with their plexiglass shielding, and they're staying, I think, 3 meters apart. And I think everyone in the audience has to wear masks as well. So it's going to be quite a different affair.
Yes, absolutely, and a very precautionary affair as well. I would agree, with Nigel. It remains a particularly important debate. I think it will be dull, but nonetheless, it remains important because they could easily end up president by default, and they have different styles. Mike Pence comes across as a bit wooden, and some would say utterly inspiring, and at times as sinister as Trump. And I would say the thought of him taking over key positions such as the head of America's armed forces was a worrying one, but we all said that about Trump, so it's no more worrying than that. Pence is a social conservative with years of experience in DC, and he has been openly critical of Trump's policy at times. For example, he called Trump's proposed bans on Muslims entering the US offensive and unconstitutional. Now, Kamala Harris is far more conservative, I would say. She's seemingly progressive and from an ethnic minority, and so a very obvious Democrat's choice as a running mate. And I must be. It must be a very strange time for her, to be honest. Of course, she would want to be as loyal as possible to Biden, but the thought that something might happen to him and that she will become America's first female president will not be far from her mind. And
can I just ask both of you? Let me ask Nigel, because I'm aware we need to move on to another story, but. Do debates like this, do they make a difference? I mean, if you haven't already made up your mind by now, do these debates change anything?
Well, obviously, some people would have been putting postal votes out already. Yes, I think they do. It depends what happens in them. When you saw Trump and Biden, I think that was probably a score draw on the basis that they were almost both as bad as each other. When you get something like this, that VEEPs don't tend to matter very much until, of course, they do. And I think that the American people will want to know what they're getting as their number two. So it could well be that the two of these could actually swing a few votes tonight.
Let's move on to Facebook, which has banned all accounts linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory movement from its platforms. Nigel, tell us about QAnon and how it's been able to grow.
Well, it started about 3 years ago, and it was somebody called Q. No one seems to know quite who that is. Who said that was a particular government clearance they had, Q clearance, and began to make what were called Q drops or breadcrumbs, and this gradually spread through social media. And now it's a conspiracy theory with thousands and thousands of conspiracy theorists behind them. Principally amongst them is they think Trump is fighting a war against celebrity Satan-worshipping paedophiles. Now, it must have been quite tricky for Facebook to decide to do what they did. Obviously, the one thing that Facebook believes in is free speech. However, there are signs now of these people are getting organized. You've got supporters running for Congress in November, for instance. And there's also the fact that they promote violence. And those two things, I think, justify what Facebook has just done.
So social media, is it now becoming tougher on misinformation? There seems to be a war happening right now with social media against misinformations. Nabila, do you see this as another step in the right direction?
Well, there is no doubt that social media has revolutionized all our lives in numerous different ways, but we also know that it can be an absolute sewer too. And Facebook in particular has become associated with numerous unpleasant developments, and QAnon is one of them. This group manages to combine lots of deeply unpleasant subjects from pedophilia to Satan, and they seem to focus on all the trigger watchwords, ones that are designed to attract the lowest of the low. And the democratization of the media has brought pretty much everybody into the fold. And it is great to see that so many people can contribute to debates. But conspiracy theories are multiplying because of this. And it is absolutely right that organizations are taking a stance. But I can't see groups like QAnon disappearing. On the contrary, they will, by definition, relish creating conspiracies around what has happened and go off and debate these conspiracies endlessly somewhere else.
Yeah, see, it's really interesting. Let's just repeat what Nigel said, that QAnon believes President Trump is waging a secret war against elite, Satan-worshipping paedophiles in government, business and media. Do people believe this stuff?
Well, apparently, hundreds of thousands of people actually do. And that's where I think it becomes dangerous, because what Facebook is talking about is that what they're worried about is partly the online harm, but mostly the offline harm. And if you have so many people who are beginning to get organized and also believe in violence, then you could end up with really tragic consequences. Hence why Facebook has taken the decision it has to take these posts down from their own sites and from Instagram.
Let's move on to the WHO. I know we talk a lot about coronavirus. Obviously, it is something that the world is facing together. The WHO, World Health Organization, now warning that there are rising levels of apathy over coronavirus. Nabila, do you have pandemic fatigue?
Well, however tired and upset COVID-19 fatigue sufferers are, I can guarantee that they are likely to feel even more tired and upset if they catch a serious dose of the disease and become very ill indeed. Saying that people feel exhausted by a global pandemic after 8 months is like saying that people felt exhausted by the Second World War after 8 months, when it actually went on for 5 years or so. Unfortunately, horrible world events tend to go on for a very long time, but the longevity is not the main problem. The main problem is that we're not in control of this illness, and it is spreading like wildfire. That said, one of the big problems of the world today is certainly short attention spans. People are so distracted all the time and likely to move on to the next subject in an instant that keeping focus on unpleasant events is very hard indeed. And this is especially so in the case of young people brought up on social media, multiple TV channels, and all the other manifestations of instant society. And a very worrying reality is that the old are far more likely to die from COVID-19. And unless we can convince young people to remain alert and to take it very seriously indeed, then society is going to continue to have extremely big problems with the disease.
See, I do understand how, if you live with disruption, with the stress, with having to be careful for months and months and months and months, I do understand how people can get sick of it. But Nigel, this is exactly what we have to do in order to get rid of it.
Well, of course we do. And I'm not entirely certain what the World Health Organization means by pandemic fatigue. If they mean, are we fed up with COVID-19? Yes, we certainly are. If they mean that we're becoming complacent, I have to say I've seen very little evidence of that in the United Kingdom, for instance. Consistently, polls are saying that people are willing to stomach more restrictions rather than fewer. We ran a poll in my newspaper on Sunday, and we were startled to find that people were calling for 6 in 10 to double fines for people who didn't obey the rules. They were quite happy for bars and restaurants to close down entirely. Even 44% would actually go along with another unlimited lockdown. So the feeling I get is that people are prepared to obey the rules once they understand them, and also see the necessity for them. Where it goes wrong, for instance, is one of our rules is to close bars and restaurants at 10 p.m. And so far, we've seen no scientific evidence why we should do that.
Yeah, some good, interesting points there. Let's move on to our final story. This is a lovely story. This is 2 scientists who've been awarded the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for developing the tools to edit DNA. And what's amazing is that both these scientists are women, Nabila. I mean, it's a great achievement. I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, but there's actually so few women who win prizes like this in science.
Well, absolutely. It is certainly a great success story, but it doesn't come without its controversy, I'm afraid. I mean, science prizes can often be uncontroversial because the vast majority of people respect science. But the work being honored in this case is primarily about genetic engineering, and genetic engineering inevitably causes all kinds of controversy. And in effect, the scientists have developed the tools to edit DNA. They are using expressions like genetic scissors and genetic editing or
Yes,
gene editing.
but they're using it in order to develop things like precision cancer therapies and to eradicate illnesses which are inherited. I don't think it's not a eugenics program.
Well, they insist that their new technology, which has, a brave new world feel to it, it has to be said, is primarily being developed to treat or prevent human diseases, which of course generates a lot of positive excitement, especially during a global pandemic. However, the prospect of gene-edited babies gets us into all kinds of murky areas. And one of the scientists involved has said that she worries about how someone like Adolf Hitler might have used the technology, which frankly says it all. But I think the scientist says that the key to using their gene editing positively is global transparency. In short, allowing everybody to see exactly what they are doing so that it can be monitored and indeed controlled ethically. And countries like Britain certainly, have an outstanding record for this type of work, and it's hoped that it will continue.
Let's just look at another aspect of this in terms of getting more women interested in science. Nigel, do you think that we're doing enough to get girls interested in STEM subjects?
No, well, quite clearly not. And a lot of governments are trying very hard to get girls interested in that kind of thing. Obviously, something like this acts as an inspiration. And so, I think it's wonderful that two women should win what is the top prize in science. And it should actually inspire a lot of young people to follow them. And I think that when it comes down to, when we're talking about the ethical considerations, what you need to have here, good regulator to make sure nothing untoward happens. But the idea that by snipping off a piece of DNA, you can prevent cancers, that would be a fantastic achievement. And that's the kind of thing that will inspire young girls, because wouldn't it be wonderful if they could take this to the next stage?
Absolutely, especially if women could find the cure for cancer, that would be perfect. As ever, Nabila and Nigel, great to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for being on Behind the Headlines.